Welcome to Better Sex, where you get the information and inspiration to create and enjoy your best possible sex life. Join your host, sex therapist Jessa Zimmerman, as she brings you expert guests, helpful tips, knowledge, and strategies to improve your intimate relationships. And now, your host, Jessa Zimmerman.
Today we're talking about ejaculatory choice. You're going to hear, I mentioned to my guest I was going to call this ejaculatory control, and he's the one that pointed out that choice is a much better term. It's about teaching men how to have choice and intention about when they ejaculate and if they ejaculate. And that these practices or these techniques that you can apply towards developing choice around your climax, your ejaculation, allows you a much greater range of pleasure, including multiple orgasms or multiple waves of pleasure like that. But it's also a really effective treatment for, what people are calling rapid or premature ejaculation, for delayed or retarded ejaculation, for lack of orgasm totally, or even erectile dysfunction. The same techniques, the same awareness, the focus on body, the focus on breath, the focus on awareness of your process and your triggers and your level of arousal, all of these things sort of can help with all the sexual dysfunctions that often bring people into my office and even bring people into Matthias's practice. But on the other side, if you're not dealing with the dysfunction, these same techniques can just open the doors to a much greater experience of pleasure and connection with your partner. So today's guest, Matthias Rose, he was actually on my podcast already talking about Tantra early on, and I've brought him back to talk about this because his Tantric work, this is a big focus of what he's working on with people. I think he said it's the number one reason men come into his practice. So he teaches Tantra. He's got this practice with his wife of Tantra and of teaching these mystical experiences, and they bring this in their work with individuals and with couples to help people improve their sexual experience and satisfaction and connection. He's based in Seattle, and he runs a Tantric community here. He often has events and workshops that he's got going, as well as his private coaching and Tantric healing business and practice. So Matthias Rose, I'm just delighted that he's back today. So Matthias, thank you so much for coming back. You're my first repeat visitor.
Well, I'm honored.
I'm really glad you're here. Okay, so the topic today is what I termed ejaculatory control.
Great.
And I wanted to start with maybe, both the positive and the negative side of why, let's see, I don't want to just come at this from a negative point of view, right? So what are the benefits of this, but also what are the problems that people experience that we might be trying to treat?
So first of all, one of the phrases that I like is in fact ejaculatory choice. So I, as a man, have a choice about whether and when I have that particular experience. Certainly, sort of looking at it from the positive side of everything, having that choice means I have access to a much larger range of pleasure than when that, experience, comes upon me from out of nowhere and suddenly everything's over.
Yeah, I was going to say, plenty of my clients, I'm sure, do not feel like they have a choice.
Right.
Yeah.
And it also, the nice thing about choice also means, or sort of opens the door to working with men who have premature ejaculation for sure, but also retarded ejaculation.
Oh.
So what about men who have difficulty reaching climax? Again, sort of the same tools and the same techniques of, ejaculatory control or ejaculatory choice help both men on both sides of that of that divide.
Okay.
And the same tools are also just, on when we're talking about dysfunctions, when we talk about erectile dysfunction, a lot of these things go directly at that as well.
Okay.
Because many times the obstacle to really experiencing our sexual pleasure. The obstacles are similar obstacles of expectation, self-worth, anxiety around what our partner thinks of us, or patterns that we have experienced and developed in our sexuality over the course of our life that simply limit our ability to fully experience the possibilities of pleasure. And I also want to make the distinction, because many men don't realize this, that there's a difference between ejaculation and orgasm for men.
Right.
That, even if you're paying very close attention to your own sensations, when I do this, when I pay attention to my sensations, I notice, there's a wave of arousal and pleasure and that internal expansion and that internal experience, and that arises and subsides. And the physical experience of ejaculation does not perfectly coincide with this. Usually, for most men, they're pretty close together.
Yeah.
But they're not the same thing. And again, by achieving ejaculatory choice, I can start to have those orgasmic experiences, those climactic rises of pleasure and openness without the ejaculation, which means I can have lots of those. I just call them waves.
Right.
Many men don't feel comfortable calling it an orgasm if there's not an ejaculation.
Right, because the correlation is so strong in their mind, right? That's the marker of an orgasm.
And there is a very particular experience that's unique to the ejaculatory orgasm, which is a spike that does coincide with that the feeling, the sensation of that ejaculation, and then the big drop in arousal, the big drop in energy.
Right.
And that doesn't happen. That only happens with ejaculation. Doesn't happen with these other kinds of orgasmic waves, which again is a beautiful way of becoming multi-orgasmic for men, is being able to have these lovely crests and arisings and subsidings of pleasure that we might call orgasm, we might certainly feel climactic,
right,
but aren't exactly the same thing as the ejaculatory orgasm.
Yeah, and like you're saying, I think most men haven't separated those things in their experience, right? It seems like it comes together close enough that they don't notice that they're a different experience and mechanism, really.
Yeah, and many men have heard about this and have maybe looked into it. There's a book called The Multi-Orgasmic Man by Mantak Chia, which is very difficult to put into practice. And there's some things that have been floating around on the internet for years, sort of e-docs that sort of guide men through this process. So I first encountered this, I don't know, about 15 years ago. And I sort of found one of these sites or one of these documents, and it was sort of a 6-week plan to achieving ejaculatory control. And I put this plan into effect in my life, and it was a complete disaster. It was a total failure. Because what happened was I was able to separate the ejaculation from the orgasm, and I started having ejaculatory experiences with no orgasm. And it was very disappointing to me.
Oh, so it went the other way.
It went the other way.
Wow. Okay.
So I was like, oh, well, this is stupid. And I threw it out. And
all I've really taken away is the main wave of pleasure here. That's
gave up that endeavor for a while. When I encountered Tantra, I guess about 6 years ago now, 5 or 6 years ago, and sort of returned to this, I realized that I was close to achieving what I had thought that I wanted, but I just didn't have anyone to sort of hold my hand through that rough patch, and realized that, I was so close.
Yeah. All right. So in addition to helping somebody that might be struggling with some sort of sexual dysfunction, you talked about it opening up this whole other realm of pleasure, and certainly multi-orgasmic capability would be one side of that. Is there anything else about the kind of pleasure you have access to that you haven't mentioned?
I guess the thing that's sort of most important to me in working with individuals and couples is that this opens a door to much greater intimacy and shared pleasure between a couple. when both partners can start to play in these orgasmic waves together, then sex becomes something very, very different than the sort of outcome driven, let's aim for orgasm, perfect scenario, we come together and then it's over.
Yeah.
That's a kind of sexual experience. It's a beautiful sexual experience, but it's not the only one, and it's not necessarily, doesn't cultivate this intimacy in the same way that playing in orgasmic waves for some period of time can. Sometimes in Tantra, there's memes and ideas going around that Tantra is all about, 4-hour sexual marathons or longer.
Right.
That is in theory possible, but most people don't have time for that. And it's pretty exhausting. Not to
I was going to say energy even.
We lose a lot of fluids, all the sweat. Oh my God. So more commonly, you could take the same amount of time that you might be taking for sexuality or a little longer and just bring more of that time to playful connection with your partner, where in having these rolling waves of pleasure together, or alternatively, sometimes it sort of flows back and forth. There's all sorts of ways that dynamic happens. Sexuality then becomes something that's a lot more open-ended. And when we start to think about and experience it in an open-ended way, we get more, not just in terms of pleasure, but in terms of felt connection to our partner, in terms of dissolving some of the perceived boundaries between ourselves and our partners, so that for this little while we start to sort of lose track of who has which body and whose sensation is whose, which is a lovely, beautiful place to be. And my experience completely in myself and with people that I've worked with, in large part this is true, although maybe not universally true, is that this results in a much different kind of romantic relationship or partnership, because other things in life start to dissolve. Other obstacles and differences in life start to dissolve, at least in their level of importance, when we're able to connect in this way.
Interesting. So I think what you're saying is not only is it more intimate because you might have a little bit more time, but there's something about not having a finish line that must immerse you in the moment. As opposed to orgasm being like the destination and the point and the ending, it's all of a sudden like, wait, we can just play here, and there's not a defined end.
Yeah, and that's one of the main techniques in sort of starting this path. It's also one of the biggest stumbling blocks for men, I've found, because when I talk to men and I'm like, ejaculatory choice, and they're like, well, why would I choose anything else?
I can hear people saying that. Yeah.
This is why I have sex. I have sex so that I can have my orgasm. I have sex so that I can have this, peak pleasure experience. Why are you telling me not to do that? And of course, I never tell anyone not to do anything.
Right.
In that sort of line. But until we start to experience the larger possibility, and as long as we're attached to that end goal, we don't know what we're missing.
Yeah.
So it's a little bit hard. I think women in some ways have it easier when they start exploring the larger realm of pleasure, because A, they're already not having an orgasm every sexual encounter.
Right.
Most women. And B, female anatomy and female arousal patterns tend to give rise to the wave-like experience without the sudden drop of energy.
Yeah.
There are certainly women who experience that sort of male kind of orgasm as well.
Right. So do you find yourself, I doubt you'd be selling anything, but sort of having to sell people on this idea of the value of this, or do you feel like clients are coming to you already seeking that kind of choice?
So that's a mixed bag. When I have male clients who are coming to me, it's usually for sexual dysfunction.
Mm-hmm.
They may not, what they really want is they want to have their orgasm when they want it.
Yeah.
So, maybe it's sooner, or maybe it's later, or maybe it's at all, but they're not coming to me for the express purpose of expanding their sexual experience to this whole other world of possibility.
Okay.
And a lot of times I can see men's eyes glaze a little bit and look at me with great skepticism when I talk about what's possible.
Yeah.
Like,
yeah.
Come on, just help me out here, bro. I just want what I know.
Yeah.
So sometimes it is, I mean, you're right. I don't sell anyone on anything, but sometimes I can see that, I'm not going to reach somebody with this. However, I don't really care for two reasons. One, I believe that a person's sexual pleasure is their own responsibility. So it's not my job to make anybody want anything. But also, the techniques that do address the dysfunction naturally lead to these kinds of experiences.
Yeah. So they're gonna end up with a glimpse, if not more, of some of this already. Yeah.
Right.
That makes sense. So what, from your perspective, I mean, you said a little bit about this, but what is going on when someone is struggling with rapid ejaculation? And you said it's the same thing if they've got delayed ejaculation too, but what are the barriers? What are the obstacles?
Well, and I would say, rapid ejaculation is probably the most common thing that people come to me for.
Okay.
That men come to me for in a coaching capacity. The retarded ejaculation, I think it's inherently less common, and men don't always seek out help with that one.
Yeah.
Rapid ejaculation, however, is sort of it's a cultural shame. It's a shame to our masculine identity that we can't control our own body, and many men, get a lot of their masculine validation from pleasing their partner, and coming too soon is is a way of failing our partner. So figuring out, I mean, there's a couple of things. A sex therapist is gonna look at, well, what's going on in the head. What are some of the things that you're anxious about? Approach really is to let a lot of that go. Because it doesn't really, from my perspective, it doesn't matter too much why we're having this experience.
Right.
The cause and effect is not my approach. My approach is, let's start applying some techniques. And the techniques are very much about letting go of any distraction from pure physical sensation in the body. And those distractions could be sort of the traditional anxiety thought pattern. Oh my gosh, I'm going to come too soon. I know I'm going to come too soon. Whoops, I came too soon.
Right.
Kinds of things. But it could be, these days, porn tends to have a pretty big factor in separating a man from his body, because so much of his sexual life has been spent in front of a two-dimensional portrayal of sexuality, and the things that arouse and lead to sexual pleasure are very different from the physical feelings of being with a partner.
Yeah.
So regardless of what the distraction is, whether it's a film playing in the mind or it's anxiety thoughts about what's going on, my approach is to bring people into, as much as possible, really a conscious attention to physical sensation. And in finding that physical attention to sensation and really staying with it, then we start to sort of instinctively develop our own ways of managing the arousal escalation path. Of course, there's also techniques around breath and sound and degrees of sensation and location of sensation that contribute to this. And there's some pressure point work as well that can help the body shift its sort of automatic path to climax. So my approach is just getting very physical. And then for some people, sort of adding in the woo-woo level of getting energetic, starting to pay attention to the flow of energy in the body takes that to another level.
Right. So are there certain techniques you use for getting people in their body, purely in the sensory experience? I mean, any that you could share? on air?
Sure. I mean, there's nothing that's terribly secret about any of it.
Okay.
And and like I said, the Montauk Chia book, Multi-Orgasmic Man, does cover this, but he writes from this Taoist perspective. So there's also a lot of sort of Taoist weird metaphysical stuff in the book of like, turn 3 times and face the north and do this, and then turn and face the south and do that. And that's none of that is my technique.
Okay.
But one of the most fundamental things that makes everybody, men, women, everybody's sex life better is breathing. And learning how different ways of breathing have an effect on what our sensation is and what we're feeling. So deep, slow breaths, calming breaths are very good for a man to do when he's feeling that urge to sort of ramp up quickly. So sort of intentionally slowing down, which is very different from, telling yourself slow down, or from, thinking about slowing down, or thinking about baseball, for God's sake.
Yeah, right. Sitting there going, I should slow down. Like that's
right. And then you say that faster and faster.
Right.
So an attention to breath is an attention to the body when we really feel the flow of air. And in particular, taking that in an upward direction. So, we breathe in from the nose down into our lungs, but if instead of following the breath in that direction, we sort of imagine breathing in and pulling our attention up from the pelvis up to the heart or up to the voice, that upward intention while breathing moves. And this, again, you can interpret this energy talk any way you want, but in my language, it moves the energy away from the lingam, the penis, away from the sex, and up into the body. And that de-escalates the arousal path, and it increases our overall pleasure, because we're now sort of inviting the pleasure that we're feeling in this one place into the rest of our body. So that's one amongst many techniques. But this one is beautiful because it works powerfully for women as well. Drawing attention, sort of starting at the focal point of sexual pleasure, and with a nice deep in-breath, drawing that attention up into the body, it expands, it oxygenates our body, which leads to higher function all around. And one of the things that most people notice when they start to do this practice is that the instinctive response, particularly around rapid ejaculation, the instinctive response is to stop breathing, to tighten, to calm down, to try and control that ejaculation by force of will. I'm not going to let it go.
Yeah, like I can clench this in, right? Like, yeah.
And ironically, that can work in a backwards way, in that assuming you do a lot of pelvic floor exercises, you can strengthen the pelvic floor muscles sufficiently that clenching everything down does block the urethra and prevent the flow of semen from leaving via its normal path. That actually doesn't stop ejaculation, though, because
you end up with retrograde ejaculation.
Exactly, it goes into the bladder.
Right?
And so men who've sort of achieved this particular skill don't really get a benefit from it, because they still have the same loss of energy, loss of interest. Right.
They're still
getting
they've
had the whole ejaculatory experience. It just hasn't come out.
Yeah.
So the tensing is a strategy that does not accomplish the real intention here.
Okay.
And by slowing and breathing deeply, it automatically interrupts that hold my breath and clench everything. Additionally, when you feel yourself, when a man feels himself starting to go into that clenching mode, stays with breath and adds the intention of, I'm going to relax everything. I'm going to relax my legs. I'm going to relax my belly. Then that's in that moment of oxygenated blood and relaxed muscles, that's when much bigger pleasure experiences start to happen. And the frustrating thing is that at first that doesn't seem to make any difference or it might even seem to accelerate the ejaculation a little bit, because now I'm consciously not trying to stop anything.
Yeah.
But that's the first little hill in a series of hills, and it's pretty quickly overcome by adding things that also sort of lower sensation a little bit. So, was there a lot of rapid thrusting? Okay, we're going to stop that. We're just going to relax and be for a few breaths before continuing that highly active sensation, which works when the man's in control of things. If his partner, this works best if your partner is collaborating with you.
Right.
So, if in that moment where you realize, oh, I need to do the deep breathing, I need to relax the muscles, you indicate to your partner, let's slow down, and she's willing to, or he is willing to, the partner's willing to slow down. That's when these bigger experiences can start to happen. And that's when we start to realize, I can feel the approach of that climax, and I can feel it recede.
Yeah.
And as I feel it recede, most men, again, this is not a universal, but many men find that after the initial climb towards climax fades without an actual climax, then the climax actually takes a little break. The body's like, oh, I thought we were going there. I guess we're not going there.
Okay.
So now you've got like 5 minutes of free play before it comes back again.
Huh. Okay.
And so that's a process. And then you've built a wave and you let it recede. We would not call that necessarily an orgasmic wave, but the next one gets higher and better, and the next one higher and better, until there's the point at which, oh my gosh, I really am experiencing pleasure and climactic experiences at the level of an orgasm without the ejaculation.
Hi, it's Jessa here, taking just a quick break. Thanks for listening so far. I wanted to let you know about the sex quiz that I've put together called How Healthy Is Your Sex Life? I've taken a close look at the typical ways that I see couples get into trouble with sex, including avoidance, neglect, negativity, distraction, and boredom. And the free quiz will score your individual results based on these factors. And then I provide my recommendations and ideas, including my top 10 sex tips, which will help you make instant improvement. If you'd like to take the quiz and see how healthy your sex life is, you can do it right now at sexhealthquiz.com. So refraining from ejaculation is not a separate kind of technique. It's just about getting sort of higher and higher waves.
Yes, with the ability to sort of back off from the things that trigger the climax.
Yeah.
Another of the techniques, and this is a pretty foundational technique that you'll read in any source whatsoever, is paying sufficient attention to our arousal to know where we are, to know how far away that climax is.
Yeah.
And so many people teach it as a 1 to 10 scale, where 1 or 0 is like, I'm not aroused, I'm not even thinking about sex. 1, 2, we're starting to, I've noticed, an attractive sexual person, or I'm thinking about the possibility. 5 or 6 is where we're aroused and we're engaged in sexual activity, but there's no climax on the horizon yet. And then 7, 8, 9 is the area where for most men, the climax could happen at any moment. We call the climax the 10, but for most men, there's really very little consciousness around what happens between, say, 6 and 10.
Yeah.
By really closely observing our own body and our own physiological response and our sensations and maybe our thoughts and maybe our emotions during that, once we're aroused and really involved, by noticing it, we want to learn a few different particular points on the path. One is, the most important one is what my teachers call the point of no return. Mm-hmm. Where even no matter what you do after that point, you're going to ejaculate. The ejaculation is going to happen. There's nothing you can do to stop it.
Inevitability is the term we use for that.
Inevitability?
Inevitability, yes.
Yeah. So there's that point, and it's very distinct.
Yeah.
But what you don't know until you pay attention is what happens before that.
Yeah.
What are the lead-up signs? How do you know that inevitability point is close? And those are some of the things that when we really start to pay attention closely, and this is often done best in self-pleasuring.
That was going to be my next question, is it's better to do with self-pleasure, masturbation, rather than with a partner.
Yeah. Some of this stuff is better to do that way because, we're not distracted or concerned about what our partner's experience is. And they're not, our partner, when we're with a partner, they might do something that's really great and completely distracts us from our, careful paying attention.
Right.
So doing particularly this 0 to 10, 1 to 10 scale analysis and inquiry and investigation and observation in self-pleasuring is, in my experience, the best way to do this. And finding, I notice this particular tension, in my pelvic floor shortly before, or whatever it is. Different men are going to have different sort of milestones or markers that indicate that inevitability point is at hand. There's another point that I experience and that many people experience, and I call it the fuck it point.
Okay, the technical term, right?
Yeah, there's a point at which my intention around ejaculatory control is a very strong intention. And then there's this point where I'm so aroused, I'm like, screw it, I just want to come.
Yeah.
That is actually, for me, that's usually before the inevitability point.
Okay.
At that point, I could still back off. It's just, I've lost the will to do so.
Well, and really, that's what most, I'm generalizing a little bit, but it seems to me that's where most men are. I mean, people, when an orgasm becomes possible, when it's within reach, most people, I think, are like, yeah, I want that, right? Yeah. They're not even, they aren't slowing down enough to think, wait, I can have some choice. I don't have to take this opportunity for this right now, Right.
So for me, my own personal experience was really learning the signs, the lead up signs to that highest level of arousal and pleasure, where I don't even care anymore. I don't want to think anymore. I just want to go for it.
Yeah.
Finding the edges before that were the first ones to really identify and master. Because then once I could get to that place and actually enjoy being there, without losing my sort of my will and my purpose around what I'm doing, then I could start to really spend more time and attention getting to know the signs of the sort of the biological inevitability point. I suppose you could call it a psychological inevitability point and a biological one, which are two different points.
Yes.
And sort of knowing both of those points and how close I am to them allows me to apply these techniques in ways that give me that level of mastery over my own body and my own experience that ultimately leads to giving me the choice.
Yeah. So I am curious, as we are getting close to the end here, if you're willing, is it easy to share what you were doing wrong when you first tried this 15 years ago, where you could have ejaculation without orgasm?
I wish I could remember the details of that approach, and I don't remember the details. I only remember the experience. Ultimately, I don't think I was doing anything wrong. It's once you start to separate these two, either of them can happen. I suppose, in sort of, I haven't even really thought about this, but just off the cuff, I suppose what I was probably doing wrong was doing the deep breathing and doing the pressure point techniques and separating the two, but not really mastering the backing off. So what my body sort of, and I see this, this happened, that same pattern happened to me again when I really, as part of the path, when I really did master it. And I've seen it happen with other men too, who at first they're like sort of afraid to even mention it. because it sounds so weird. I had a ejaculation without an orgasm. I don't even know what that was.
Yeah.
But I guess the essence is, really applying the relaxation and the will to mastering this, and not worrying about it. Sometimes it is going to happen one way or the other.
Right,
okay.
Right.
And I want to mention this again from a different angle, because it's very important to know that there's never a time when we have it perfect. Sex is just not perfect.
Right.
So
right.
Certainly, I've been doing this for years now, but sometimes, the climax still catches me by surprise. It's like it's been lurking in the shadows.
It leaps out from behind the door.
Gotcha. And I'm like, okay. So the most important thing for all of this is to enjoy it, everything. That there's no blame, no shame, there's no failure.
Right.
Any of this. And if you have an orgasmic wave of pleasure without an ejaculation, fantastic. If you have an ejaculation without an orgasmic wave of pleasure, then that's what happened right now.
Yeah.
None of this is bad. The more we can actually embrace all of the possible experiences and allow them, the more we can move through any sort of short-term detours and get back to our intention.
Yeah. I'm so glad you made that point, because I'm always trying to tell people you really can't fail, and that's so important for people to hear.
Mm-hmm.
So how can people learn a little bit more about you? How can they find you online? What do you want to say about people reaching out to you?
Well, so I have a website, MatthiasRose.com, Matthias-Rose.com. And they can certainly learn more about me there. This year, I've been doing less on the workshops and the group events. So I don't have any workshops planned right now. Sort of scaling up for sort of the next direction I want to go with some of that stuff. But I certainly love coaching men and women. And then there's also, I'll mention this one other thing. There's also, you can also work with a somatic practitioner, where this is different than working with than learning this stuff with a lover. It's learning some of these techniques, applying some of these techniques with somebody in a hands-on way, that where the practitioner who's helping you can see some of the things that are going on in you better than maybe you can yourself.
Right.
Give you that guidance around breath and can give you that guidance. There's a number of different modalities of this. Sexological body work is one of the most well-known sort of professional organizations that provides trained practitioners to help men or women with these kinds of things. My particular modality is tantric healing or learning tantra,
right?
Where I coach that. So my wife Pandora and I, both also do sort of the hands-on helping somebody have the felt experience. Because one of the real beauties of this is once you feel it, once you sort of have the experience of, oh, wow, now I know what he's talking about.
Yeah.
It's much easier to replicate that on your own or with a lover.
Right.
Once your body has a sense of, oh, I see how that goes. It's a little bit like learning to ride a bike, except that in sex, we're going to keep falling off the bike.
Right.
We never stop falling off the bike. Falling is part of the fun part.
Right. But we're not going to get hurt necessarily. So
we're not. Hopefully not.
Right. Well, great. Thank you.
Acrobatic you've been trying to be.
Yeah. Thank you so much for coming back on the show. I'm really glad we covered this today.
You're welcome. Thank you for having me.
Yeah.
You've been listening to Better Sex. Please visit our website, bettersexpodcast.com, for show notes and additional episodes.
And that's a wrap for today. I really hope you enjoyed the episode. If you are enjoying the podcast, if some of this material resonates with you and you would like to make a difference and make sure that this keeps coming out in the world once a week, ongoing, there are a couple things you could do to show your appreciation. The first would be to go to iTunes and rate and review the show. That really helps us be found by new listeners when you review the show on iTunes. You can find a link at bettersexpodcast.com/iTunes. The other thing I want to invite you to consider is becoming a Patreon. For a small monthly pledge, you get some benefits. So for $2 a month, you get advance access to every single episode. For $5 a month, you get a chapter of my upcoming new book. And for $10 a month, I host quarterly get to know you and question and answer chats over the web, and you get invited to that. I would love to have your membership in that, become part of the Better Sex family. You can find a link at bettersexpodcast.com/Patreon, which is Patreon. Again, thanks for listening. I'm glad you're here. Feel free to comment, ask questions, get in touch. I'd love to hear from listeners. Thanks.